More transit passengers are set to travel through Singapore after Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand are added to the list.
Singapore announces 100 new COVID-19 cases, including 1 in the community and 2 that are imported.
Is a mutated strain of the coronavirus 10 times more infectious than the original? Well, that's up for debate.
Good evening, you're watching The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Quay.
And I'm Haryanto Diman. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode.
Now, passengers on Singapore Airlines, Silkair and Scoot flights departing from Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand can now transit through Changi Airport.
From Indonesia, the departure cities are Medan, Jakarta and Surabaya. From Malaysia, it's Penang, Ipoh, Kuala Lumpur and Kuching. Now from Thailand, it's just Bangkok. These locations add to a growing list of countries and cities approved for transit flights through Singapore.
Around the region, the SIA Group had earlier received approval to fly transit travellers from Cambodia and Vietnam. Along with Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand, these Southeast Asian destinations were major transit markets for SIA before the pandemic. Other approved countries include China, Japan and the UK.
Meanwhile, the aviation industry is calling on countries to accept a negative COVID-19 test within 48 hours of travel as an alternative to quarantines. Airports and airlines are asking the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is a United Nations task force, to consider making that recommendation when it meets later today to review guidelines for international travel.
According to a Reuters report, the proposal from the Airports Council International and International Air Transport Association states that, quote, a test prior to departure could reduce the risk of importation by up to 90%, enabling air travel to be opened up between a large number of countries without a quarantine requirement. While the UN task force recommendations are voluntary, the guidelines are typically adopted by all 193 member countries.
We are joined by journalist Toh Ting Wei to discuss this further. Ting Wei, the resumption of transit flights through Singapore from the approved countries is a welcome move. How does this benefit our national carrier, Singapore Airlines Group, Changi Airport, or even our aviation sector in general?
I think for Singapore Airlines and Changi Airport, the obvious answer is that they will get more passengers in the short term. So, because for example, with this approval of transit flights from Vietnam, someone who is living in Vietnam and who wants to travel to maybe Sydney in Australia can take a SIA flight to transit in Singapore. So in that sense, it opens up a bit more markets. But when you look at it in the bigger picture, it's actually kind of a better than nothing situation. Like there are more passengers for both Changi Airport and SIA, but the number is not that significant. To put it into context, for last year, say for transit passengers, even like when air travel was okay and there was no COVID, it only made up about 1/3 of Changi Airport's total traffic. And now the numbers, even as Singapore starts to slowly approve the more transit passengers to come in, the number is still really a small fraction of what it used to be.
Airlines and airports are also pushing for countries to accept a negative COVID-19 test within 48 hours of travel as an alternative to quarantines. I can imagine this is a very concerted, coordinated effort if it comes to pass among countries. For example, Singapore's stay-home notice regulations differ from what other countries have in place. So, Ting Wei, what are some considerations you think for this plan to work?
Several considerations. So regarding the call for to replace the quarantine requirements and stuff, it has been ongoing for some time, especially from industry groups like the International Air Transport Association. And also the International Civil Aviation Organization has also called for countries to coordinate their responses. But it's a lot easier said than done because, for example, the suggestion about the testing 48 hours before departure, when you look at the incubation period of COVID-19, is 14 days. So when you take the test 2 days before and you fly over, there's really a lot of room for the thing to fail in the sense that you can come into the country with the COVID virus. So that's the health consideration is the main thing. And when you look at it, I guess other things that the countries need to consider is that it's important for them to be at the same stage of the COVID-19 infections, in the sense that, let's say, if a country has controlled the situation quite well, and another country is still battling a lot of infections, and chances are when you get someone coming from that country, you have a high rate of infection, then obviously the partnerships can't work. So that's that.
And on that note, what challenges do you foresee then arising from this scheme?
I think the one of the key things, actually maybe the key thing will be for whether travelers still want to travel, because I think like most of us, we do miss travel after so long of not going out. But when you look at the bigger picture, there's also a lot of things that will stop you from traveling. So for example, if you go with the current green lane arrangements with Malaysia, you have to take a COVID test there, and then after that you come to Singapore, you take another COVID test. So, and these COVID tests are not cheap, like maybe around $200. So even so that's the cost consideration for this. So you are just adding like $400-$500 to your travel costs, and then you also have to stay somewhere to wait for the results. And also, there's the risk of bringing the virus back to someone you are concerned about, especially maybe the more vulnerable people, like the older people. And then when you look at it, like for example, in Singapore's case, the government has said like if you are out traveling, and you come back, have to pay for your own medical costs for if you get COVID. So I think that's another big concern for many people. So I think even if you open up the skies at the moment, like no matter, assuming it's a big if that all the airports, governments, and after relevant authorities worldwide can work out a feasible kind of framework for air travel to continue. But then it's a big if whether passengers still want or still can travel, even if like this is in place.
Well, thank you so much, Toh Ting Wei, for coming on to the show to speak with us. We were speaking to journalist Toh Ting Wei.
An update on the COVID-19 situation in Singapore. 100 new cases were confirmed today, including one community case who's a Singaporean. There are also 2 imported cases who had been placed on stay-home notice upon their arrival here. Singapore now has nearly 56,000 cases, and more details will be shared later tonight.
According to a DBS Bank report, middle-aged workers have borne the brunt of the COVID-19 pandemic, with the dismal economic climate taking a heavy toll on their salaries. Among workers whose salaries fell, the incomes of more than half of people aged 35 to 44 plunged by over 30%. Plus, compared to older workers, they have fewer support measures. At the same time, middle-aged workers also face higher competition from their younger peers, and their relatively higher wages also make them susceptible to pay cuts.
Singapore will have one of the world's largest floating solar farms come next year as work begins on the project in Tuas. The solar farm at Changi Reservoir will help reduce our dependence on fossil fuels as well as slash carbon emissions and strengthen national climate resilience. Once commercial operations are in full swing next year, it will offset 7% of PUB's annual energy needs.
YouTuber and DJ Dkosh has apologized for texting a 15-year-old minor in a quote, problematic and inappropriate way. Several police reports were filed against him following a series of sexual harassment allegations leveled against the 32-year-old over the weekend by alleged victims, mostly young men, on Instagram and Twitter. Among the accusations were that he had solicited nude pictures and offered money to minors in return for sexual favors. The police said investigations are ongoing.
Now, there have been reports from across the coast. We have a more infectious coronavirus strain, 10 times more infectious at that. And if you recall, Jan, yesterday, the Philippines also reported that it's found the same variant in the country.
But experts in Singapore told the Straits Times that there's no basis for Malaysia's claim. They also said that this D614G strain has been circulating in Singapore since February.
Well, Professor Wang Linfar is one of the experts disputing this claim, and he joins us now. Prof. Wang is, of course, the director of the Emerging Infectious Diseases Programme at Duke-NUS Medical School. Welcome, Professor. So, while you've said that there is no real scientific data that points to the D614G strain being more transmissible, is there a fear, though, that there could be a more contagious variant? And if so, is there anything being done to prevent that?
I think that, scientifically, as you already stated, that particular mutant D61G was circulating around the world for a long time, since February. And we had it in Singapore, and now it become a dominant strain circulating in the world. So I think that scientifically, maybe that for most of the laymen, they interpret this as a more transmissible or more deadly, but that's not true. It just means that genetically, we say it's have a greater fitness. So it means that it can replicate and stay with human infection better than other virus. But it's a different concept from more deadly or more transmissible, because so far we don't see any evidence of that.
Right. Prof, your program Deputy Professor Wee Eng Yong also said this mutation has zero impact on vaccine efficacy. Now that's good, but could you elaborate to us what that means?
Yeah, so again, it's a very scientific kind of point, is that this mutation, D614G, is at the position 614 on the key protein on the surface of the virus called the spike protein. And that's the protein we use for vaccine. And Professor Wee is doing a vaccine trial in Singapore right now. But the key functional component of the vaccine is something that we call receptor binding domain, which interact with the host receptor, which is in a region that before upstream of 614G. That's why that this mutation will have zero impact, as Professor Wee said, because the key functional domain for the vaccine development is outside of this mutation.
Right. Well, Prof, let's change topics. Two international aviation bodies are pushing for travelers to be tested for COVID-19 within 48 hours of departure as an alternative to quarantines. What's your take on that? Do you think that that kind of plan is feasible?
Well, it's feasible, but whether it will be very effective, that, so I can understand, myself want to travel right now, but if it's a 2 weeks quarantine in each way, then it's very, very prohibiting. So this is alternative being proposed. Basically, you have to do a test within 48 hours of departure to make sure you're negative. But what I'm trying to say is that maybe you need another test at least 48 hours on arrival. So make sure that you are negative at least for 4 days, because you can have a test that is negative 48 hours before departure, because we know that virus, after infected, within hours, for example, it's going to be negative, right? And then the virus will be replicating in your body. Some, individual takes 1 day, some individual takes 3, 4, 5 days before you have symptom. And then a negative test within 48 hours departure is not 100%, proof to say that you are not infected. So I guess, on one hand, I can understand that, the aviation industry is trying to do something different to encourage people to travel. On the other hand, I think that it's not going to be risk-free. So what I'm suggesting is that if you want to do that, then you need to test on arrival within another 2 days.
Right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Professor Wang. That was Professor Wang Linfar, Director of the Emerging Infectious Diseases Programme at Duke-NUS.
Good evening, I'm Dylan Ang with the global headlines. New Zealand ruled out the possibility that the current COVID-19 outbreak in Auckland came from frozen food items or freight, meaning that the origin of this resurgence is still unknown. The investigation results come as authorities reported another 13 cases today, taking the total number of active cases to 90. In the Philippines, Manila eased its strict 2-week lockdown measures, reimposed at the start of the month, following fears that the healthcare system would collapse. President Rodrigo Duterte said the decision to do so was to save the ailing economy, even though new infections continue to top 3,000 a day. The Philippines continues to have the highest number of COVID-19 cases in Southeast Asia. Air India has been banned from flying to Hong Kong for 2 weeks. The reason? For carrying too many passengers infected with COVID-19. Hong Kong has linked 11 imported cases on an Air India flight from Delhi to poor pre-flight testing for the virus. This is the first time officials have invoked an emergency public health regulation to penalize an airline for such an offense. In sports, more bad news for tennis fans as Japan's Kei Nishikori revealed that he has contracted the coronavirus. The world number 31 will withdraw from the upcoming US Open, due to start on August 31st. Meanwhile, women's world number 2 Simona Halep is also pulling out of the Grand Slam, joining world number 1 Ashley Barty, as well as defending champion Bianca Andreescu, all citing coronavirus concerns. And those are the headlines around the world. It's back to you guys.
Thanks so much, Dylan. Well, those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on A Big Story.